Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. Some people don't believe the bridge is gone until they smell the smoke from it burning. Let's be real. When a chosen one finally walks away, it's not just an exit. It's an extinction-level event for the illusions people built around your presence. And right now, they're in complete denial. Why? Because they never thought you'd actually do it. They underestimated the quiet strength behind your smile, the prayers behind your silence, and the power behind your patience. They thought they had unlimited access to your grace. But here's the kicker. Even Jesus left towns where he wasn't honored. And he didn't send a follow-up email either. Statistically speaking, most people only change after the person who held them up is no longer around. They don't respect healing, they react to loss. And guess what? Your departure is hitting them harder than they expected. They thought they'd guilt you, gaslight you, guilt-light you. Yes, that's a word now. But now you dipped with dignity. You didn't announce it. You didn't throw shade. You simply left like a ghost with a purpose and a passport. And now they're standing in the emotional debris of a connection they thought would always serve them. This episode is not about bitterness. It's about truth. Why you're leaving is final. Why they're so haunted by your absence. And why deep down they know they'll never have access to you on that level again. So grab a seat, hydrate, and brace yourself. Because this isn't just closure. It's a spiritual mic drop. Let's get into it. Number one, they never believed you'd choose peace over proximity. They never actually thought you'd leave. Deep down, they believed they had you wrapped. Not just emotionally, but spiritually. You were the one they could always count on to forgive, to explain, to show up, to stay. Even when staying hurt you, they tested your limits, pushed your buttons, crossed boundaries like they didn't exist. And every time you still extended grace, you still tried to make it work. You still gave them chances they never deserved. That's why your exit shook them, because they never thought you had the strength to choose peace over proximity. See, people confuse kindness with weakness. They think your empathy is proof that you'll tolerate anything. They think because you love deeply, you'll settle for dysfunction. But that's where they got it wrong. Your love was never the problem. Their lack of accountability was. You were holding space for healing, not chaos. You were offering peace, not permission to be treated like you didn't matter. And now that you finally walked away, they're rattled. Not because you yelled, not because you argued, but because you left without asking for closure. You didn't need a dramatic finale. You didn't beg them to understand. You just chose yourself. And that's what terrifies them. Because the strongest message you ever sent was the one you never had to say, I'm done. They don't know how to process your absence because they were too used to your presence being guaranteed. They never considered what their world would look like without your energy. Now they're scrambling to figure out what happened, but deep down they know. They just never thought you'd follow through. And here's the truth. They always assumed history would keep you loyal, that your past with them was enough to keep you tied to a present that kept hurting you. But you outgrew it. You realize that peace isn't selfish, that walking away from people who drain you is not betrayal, it's self-respect. And for once, you didn't care how they'd react. You cared how you would feel, continuing to betray your own well-being for the sake of keeping them comfortable. You chose peace. You chose clarity. You chose healing. And now that they no longer have access to you, they finally realize what they lost. But it's too late, because you're not turning around this time. You meant it. It's final. Number two, you were their supply of significance. Now they're starving. They didn't love you. They loved what being around you did for their ego. You were their emotional fuel station, the one they plugged into whenever life reminded them how empty they truly were. You were the safe space, the healer, the listener, the one who always made them feel seen, even when they never did the same for you. And now that you're gone, it's not heartbreak they're feeling. It's withdrawal. Because you were their only real source of emotional significance, and now they're starving. Your energy validated them. Your presence gave them a sense of importance. They mistook that as a sign of mutual connection, but really it was a one-way transaction. You were pouring, they were draining, and they grew addicted to it, addicted to how good you made them feel about themselves, not because they genuinely cared for you, but because you filled the holes in their self-worth without asking them to fix the leak. Now that you've walked away, there's no one left to hold the mirror up. They don't see their flaws as clearly when you're not around reflecting them with gentle truth. They don't feel as powerful now that they can't use your loyalty as leverage. And it's not just your kindness they miss, it's the control they had while you were still trying to keep the peace. You were the one thing they could count on to stay consistent, while they gave you inconsistency in return. They're spiraling not because they miss you, but because they miss how important they felt around you. And it's hard for them to admit that, so they'll twist the story. They'll say you abandoned them, they'll say you changed. But the truth is, they relied on your emotional labor to keep them afloat. And now that it's gone, they're drowning in their own emptiness. You didn't leave them out of anger. You left them out of awakening. You realize that you can't keep feeding people who refuse to learn how to cook. You were never just a partner, a friend, or a family member. You were their emotional supply line. And once you shut off the valve, they had no choice but to sit with the void they spent years avoiding. Now they're forced to face the truth. Your presence was the privilege they never earned, and your absence is the consequence they never saw coming. Number 3, they confused your endurance with blindness. They thought you didn't know. They thought you weren't paying attention. They assumed you were just naive, overly forgiving, or too soft to call out the disrespect. But the truth is, you saw everything. You just chose silence over chaos. You watched them lie, manipulate, gossip, and sabotage. And instead of reacting, you observed. You calculated. You waited. Because you weren't confused. You were just collecting receipts, energy, and strength. They confused your endurance with blindness. They thought because you weren't clapping back, you didn't catch the shade, because you didn't explode, you didn't feel the disrespect. But you felt every shift, every fake smile, every passive-aggressive jab. You clocked the patterns. You noticed how the support only showed up when it was convenient for them. You saw how they started treating you like an afterthought the moment you stopped being useful. But you didn't want to leave out of anger. You wanted to leave with clarity. You didn't want to act from emotion. You wanted to move with precision. And now that you're gone, it's shocking to them. Because they truly believed you were oblivious to their behavior. They mistook your grace as ignorance. What they didn't realize was you were only quiet because you were giving them a chance to change, a chance they wasted. Now they're looking confused, trying to figure out when and why you suddenly disappeared. But it wasn't sudden. It was slow. It was the result of 1,000 little betrayals they never thought you noticed. They thought they were being slick. They thought you'd stay because you always had. But this time you didn't say a word. You didn't argue. You didn't explain. You just stopped showing up. And that silence said more than any speech ever could. Your absence is louder than your presence ever was. And now, they're realizing too late that you were never unaware. You were just done being disrespected. You don't owe them closure. You don't owe them a breakdown of their own behavior. Because when someone really cares, they don't need a manual to treat you right. You gave them time. You gave them grace. But you finally gave yourself peace. And the only reason they're shocked is because they never thought you were strong enough to leave. But now they know you saw it all and still chose yourself. Number 4, your exit wasn't dramatic, it was divine. They were bracing for chaos. They thought when you finally had enough, you'd explode, maybe curse them out, slam a door, post something indirect for attention. That's what they would have done, because drama is the only language they speak. They only recognize emotion when it's loud and messy. So when you didn't give them any of that, when you walked away quietly, peacefully, without theatrics, they were confused, then scared. Because silence from someone who's always been loud with love, that's not apathy, that's divine alignment. You didn't leave to prove a point. You didn't leave to hurt them. You left because your spirit couldn't survive there anymore. You didn't need a megaphone. You didn't need an audience. You didn't need them to understand. You just needed to obey the whisper in your soul that said, it's time. And when that moment came, you moved with grace, with certainty, with finality. And they hate that. Not just because you're gone, but because they never got to spin a story around your exit. You didn't give them the outburst they could use to paint you as crazy, emotional, or toxic. You robbed them of the drama, so all they're left with is the truth. That they had someone real, someone rare, and lost them because they never thought you'd actually go. What they don't understand is your exit wasn't just maturity, it was spiritual. You didn't need revenge, you didn't need validation, you had peace, and peace doesn't scream, peace doesn't beg, peace doesn't wait around to be seen or heard. It moves quietly, completely. And when peace moves through a chosen one, it doesn't just leave a place, it leaves a message. That silence, it wasn't emptiness, it was sacred punctuation. It was God's period at the end of a chapter he never meant for you to stay stuck in. That silence told them everything. You had a real one, you lost a real one, and there's no coming back from this. They're replaying every moment now, trying to find the moment they pushed too far, but it doesn't matter anymore, the story's already written. And you walked out on the final page with your dignity intact, no explanation needed. Because that's what divine exits look like. They don't need to be loud to be final. Number 5, they're mourning a version of you that no longer exists. They're grieving, but not for the reasons they're pretending. They'll say they miss you, that things haven't been the same without you. But if we're being honest, they don't miss you. They miss the version of you they could walk all over. The version that kept quiet to keep the peace. The one that bent over backwards just to be halfway seen. The version that watered yourself down so they could feel big. That version, gone, buried, laid to rest in the same wilderness they exiled you to, because that's where the transformation happened, in the wilderness. The silence, the isolation, the betrayal, the disrespect. That's where you died and resurrected, not physically, but spiritually. You shed every false identity, every trauma-induced response, every role they forced you into. You went through hell, not to come back the same, but to come back unrecognizable. Now that you've evolved, they don't know how to relate to you anymore. You don't tolerate the same disrespect. You don't laugh at the same petty jokes. You don't respond to the same manipulation tactics. The buttons they used to press don't work anymore, and it frustrates them. Because they had power over the old you, and now you don't even flinch. They call you cold. Say you've changed. Accuse you of being selfish. But what they're really saying is, you're no longer who I can control. And that's not a loss they're equipped to deal with, because they didn't love you unconditionally. They loved your compliance. They loved your self-sacrifice. They loved your silence, but your rebirth isn't a negotiation table. This upgraded version of you is not for sale, for rent, or for performance. The new you has boundaries. The new you knows your worth. The new you chooses peace, purpose, and alignment over people-pleasing. And that has them shook. They're stuck mourning a memory, a ghost of who you used to be. But you're not looking back. Because when you outgrow a version of yourself, going back to please others feels like self-betrayal. You didn't survive all that pain just to be palatable again. You didn't rebuild yourself just to shrink for people who never appreciated your full size. That version of you is gone, and you're never resurrecting it for anyone. Number 6, you didn't leave to prove a point. You left to preserve your calling. You didn't leave because you wanted to be petty. You didn't leave to make a statement or to get people talking. You left because your soul couldn't breathe there anymore. You started to feel it slowly at first, that sense of inner suffocation, that spiritual heaviness that wouldn't go away. And when you finally looked around, you realized the people closest to you weren't just draining your energy, they were putting your purpose in danger. It wasn't ego, it wasn't bitterness, it was survival, spiritual survival, because every time you stayed quiet when you should have spoken up, a piece of your voice got smaller. Every time you allowed someone to mistreat you, your sense of worth took another hit. You started losing focus, losing clarity. losing yourself just to keep certain people comfortable in your presence. But comfort shouldn't come at the cost of your calling. And once you realized that, the decision became clear. You weren't created to be a cushion for people who refuse to grow. You weren't sent here to play small so others could feel big. You have a divine assignment on your life, something only you can do. And staying in environments that feed your wounds instead of your wisdom was starting to poison that assignment. So no, you didn't walk away to be seen. You walked away to stay sane. Because the truth is, if you had stayed any longer, you would have had to sacrifice your peace, your passion, and your power. And no calling is ever fulfilled by someone who keeps choosing comfort over obedience. You saw how much of your purpose was bleeding in the name of loyalty. And you stopped the bleeding, not with revenge, but with boundaries. They may think you left to be dramatic. Let them think what they want, because they were never supposed to understand your mission. That was between you and God. And when the time came to choose between your past and your purpose, you chose right. Your exit wasn't noise. It was necessary. You left, not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving what you were born to do. And that calling, it's not up for compromise, not anymore. Number 7. They never planned to heal, they just expected you to keep absorbing. They never had healing on their to-do list, not yesterday, not today, not ever. Because healing takes work, it takes honesty, it takes ownership. And they were never prepared to look at themselves that closely, so instead of doing the inner work, they leaned on you like a crutch. You became their emotional sponge, their therapist, their cheerleader, their punching bag. You were everything to them except human. They dumped their anger on you, their insecurities, their pain, and every time you showed up, you listened, you supported, you forgave. You carried their weight like it was your own, thinking love meant absorbing everything without limit. But over time it became clear they were never trying to heal. They were just using your love to stay broken in comfort. They didn't want growth. They wanted maintenance. They wanted you to hold the mirror, but not too close. They wanted to vent, but never reflect. They wanted your compassion, but not your boundaries. And for a while you thought if you just loved harder, things would change. If you stayed patient, they'd finally see the damage they were causing, not just to you, but to themselves. But that moment never came, because it was never going to. You weren't in a partnership, you were in an emotional hostage situation. They built their comfort around your ability to absorb what they refused to deal with. And the day you stopped doing that, their whole world cracked. You unplugged. You stopped responding to the same recycled drama. You stopped showing up to fix what they kept breaking. You stopped making excuses for the mess they never tried to clean up. And now they're spiraling, not because you left, but because they never prepared to face their own reflection. They were depending on your emotional labor to carry them through life, and now that it's gone, they are exposed. They never had a healing plan. You were the plan. And now that you've stepped away, they are forced to either grow or self-destruct. And sadly, many will choose the latter. Because your absence didn't just leave a void, it left them face to face with the work they never intended to do. And that is what scares them most. Number 8, your goodbye exposed their entire act. When you finally said goodbye, it didn't just shift the dynamic. It shattered their entire performance, because that's what it was all along, a carefully crafted act. They built a version of themselves that looked kind, generous, and selfless. To outsiders, they were the model friend, partner, parent, or leader, but behind closed doors, you knew the truth. You were the one holding everything together. You were the one sacrificing your peace, your energy, and your voice just to keep things looking normal. They needed your presence like a prop on a stage. You gave their story credibility. You made them look balanced, loving, and grounded. You were the proof they pointed to when they wanted others to believe they were good people. But it wasn't love, it was image management. The second you stepped away, the curtain dropped, the illusion cracked. and the audience started paying attention in ways they never had before. Your absence became the loudest thing in the room. People started asking questions. Why did you really leave? Why are they so quick to blame you? Why do things seem to fall apart now that you're no longer around? The narrative they worked so hard to control is slipping from their hands, and it's driving them mad. Because here's the part they never considered. Your presence was covering up a lot of their dysfunction. You were the calm in the chaos. You were the reason things didn't completely collapse. You absorbed, mediated, fixed, explained, softened. But now that you're not there to do that, the cracks are becoming impossible to hide. The same people they tried to convince you were on their side are now side-eyeing them. The mask is slipping, the lies are unraveling, and all of it started the moment you said, enough. They didn't expect your exit to be that powerful. But when someone walks in truth, their silence tells the whole story. You didn't need revenge. You didn't need to expose them. You just had to leave. And without even trying, your goodbye put the spotlight on the real problem, and it wasn't you. Number 9, they're addicted to access, not accountability. They were never really connected to you. They were connected to the access they had to you, to your time, your love, your intuition, your energy. You were a resource, a lifeline, a spiritual power source. They didn't appreciate your presence. They consumed it. And now that you've cut them off, they're not missing the relationship. They're missing the benefits of having someone like you at arm's reach, ready to pour out your light without hesitation. They never wanted accountability, they wanted convenience. They loved how available you were, but they hated when you asked for basic respect. They took your understanding as an invitation to walk all over you. They mistook your patience for permission, and the second you created space, asked for more, or put up a boundary, they flipped the script. Suddenly you were too sensitive, difficult, changed. But what really changed? You stopped letting them use you unchecked. They don't miss who you are. They miss what they could take from who you are. And that's the difference most people never want to admit. If they really valued you, they would have protected the connection. They would have taken accountability when they hurt you. They would have asked how to be better, not how to get back in. But they can't face themselves. They can't say, I had access to someone rare, and I blew it. That kind of self-reflection would require depth they haven't developed, so instead they twist the story. They demonize your distance. They say you've changed for the worse when really you just got wise. And that wisdom, that's what they were feeding off the whole time. You finally stopped playing the role of fixer, forgiver, emotional safety net, and now they're spiraling. Not because they want to be better, but because they want the benefits of you, without the responsibility of respecting you. Your boundaries feel like betrayal to someone who was never committed to treating you right in the first place. But that's not your problem anymore. You gave them chances, you gave them grace. What you stopped giving was unearned access. And that's what's got them panicking. Because now they have to face life without the energy they once drained freely, and they're realizing too late that your light was never owed. Number 10, you leaving wasn't betrayal, it was spiritual graduation. They will tell people you betrayed them, that you switched up, that you walked away from everything without a second thought. But that is just the story they tell themselves, so they do not have to face the truth. Because if they ever stopped long enough to reflect, they would have to admit what really happened. You evolved. You did not leave because you were cruel. You left because you were finally clear. You were done carrying the emotional weight of generational expectations, silent suffering, and one-sided loyalty. You were done with the guilt that was passed down like an inheritance. Done with the contracts your soul never signed, but kept living out, just to avoid making others uncomfortable. This was not betrayal. This was graduation. You passed the test, the one where you had to choose between staying where it was familiar but toxic, or stepping into the unknown and trusting the voice inside you that kept whispering, there is more. You chose the hard path, You chose the honest path, and you walked out of a cycle that others were still pretending was normal. They were content repeating the same lessons over and over, comfortable in the dysfunction, proud of the denial. They expected you to do what you always did, keep the peace, carry the load, say yes when everything inside you screamed no. But this time you didn't. You broke the pattern, and that to them felt like betrayal. Because your growth highlighted their refusal to grow. When someone is used to you playing a certain role, your decision to stop playing it will always be seen as betrayal. But you did not leave to hurt them. You left to heal yourself. You did not abandon them. You just stopped abandoning yourself. You were never meant to stay in that karmic classroom forever. The lessons were brutal, the tests were emotional, but you passed. You learned when to let go, when to forgive yourself, when to walk away, not in anger, but in wisdom, and now you are free. They will keep calling it betrayal. Let them. That is how they cope. But deep down, even they know, you did what they never had the courage to do. You evolved, and evolution always looks like betrayal to those who choose comfort over transformation. Number 11. They mistook your spiritual assignment for codependency. They thought you were there to serve them, not to stretch them. They saw your compassion and mistook it for submission. They saw your presence as permission. You were patient, understanding, and deeply invested, not because you were weak, but because you were called. You had a spiritual assignment, a divine purpose to bring light, healing, truth, and elevation into their life. But instead of receiving it, they tried to possess it. They confused your mission with a permanent position. You weren't sent to stay forever. You were sent to awaken, to expose the truth, to mirror their wounds, to activate growth. But they didn't want growth. They wanted you to stay small, silent, and available. They wanted your energy, your time, your wisdom, but without the responsibility that comes with honoring it. You were never codependent. You were divinely connected. And that's a whole different frequency. You were showing up out of assignment, not out of need. But they convinced themselves you couldn't live without them, that you needed them more than they needed you. So they became careless, entitled, unchecked. They stopped listening. They stopped evolving. They stopped honoring the very presence that was elevating their life. And when you finally stepped back, when you quietly said, "My part here is done," they were stunned, because they believed the bond was based on your inability to leave. But it was never that. You stayed because your spirit said to. You poured because your purpose called for it. But once the lesson was taught, once the mirror was placed, once your energy had done what it was sent to do, you were released. Now they're scrambling, trying to figure out where the blessing went, trying to figure out why things feel spiritually dry, emotionally off, and energetically heavier. And they still haven't realized the favor wasn't tied to the room. The favor was tied to you. You weren't just someone in their life. You were the assignment. You were the light. You were the one God sent to stir what they refused to face. And they wasted it trying to keep you boxed in. Now that you're gone, they're sitting in the dark, slowly realizing you weren't dependent on them. They were dependent on you. Number 12. You didn't leave because you stopped loving them. You left because you started loving you. They think you left because you stopped caring, that you became cold, that your heart changed. But the truth is, you didn't leave because the love disappeared. You left because you finally realized the love you were giving out never made its way back to you. You were loving from an empty cup. You were sacrificing your peace to hold together a bond that constantly broke you. And for too long you convinced yourself that staying was noble, that enduring was strength, that losing pieces of yourself was just the price you paid for being loyal. But eventually, you reached a point where your spirit couldn't keep pretending. You started to feel it in your body. The tiredness, the emotional weight, the slow, steady drain that no amount of sleep could fix. It wasn't depression. It wasn't confusion. It was your soul begging you to stop betraying yourself. You spent so much time loving them through their flaws, their neglect, their silence, their chaos, and none of that made them better. It just made you smaller. Until one day you finally asked the question that changed everything. What would it look like if I loved myself the way I keep loving them? That was the shift. That was the moment everything snapped into place. They still don't get it. They think your exit was an attack, that you suddenly became selfish. But you're not selfish. You're sober. You're awake. You're finally choosing to pour into the one person you've been abandoning this whole time, yourself. And that doesn't mean you stopped loving them. It just means you stopped loving them at your own expense. You didn't leave with anger. You left with clarity. You realized that real love, healthy, soul-honoring love, doesn't ask you to suffer. It doesn't require you to disappear. It doesn't silence your needs or make you feel guilty for having them. And once you saw that, you couldn't unsee it. So no, they don't get to twist the story. They don't get to say you turned your back. Because the truth is you were always facing them. You just finally turned toward you. You didn't leave because your heart went cold. You left because it finally started beating for you. Number 13. They still think it's a break. They don't realize it's closure. They're still stuck in denial, still trying to convince themselves that this is just one of those little moments you'll get over, that you are just being emotional or taking space. They're telling mutual friends things like they'll come around or we just need a minute. But deep down they have a sinking feeling they can't shake because something in your silence feels different this time. And they are right. This isn't a pause. This isn't a break. This isn't a dramatic reaction that will cool down in a week or two. This is final. This is closure. This is you realizing that the cycle has expired and the contract is void. They were so used to you breaking your own boundaries just to keep the peace, so used to you forgiving too quickly, coming back too soon, giving more chances than they deserved, that now they're actually shocked that you meant it when you walked away. They still think they have time, that there is a window. But what they don't understand is that you did not just close the door, you dismantled the entire hallway. You left no trail. You're not watching your phone. You are not replaying the what-ifs. You're not stuck in the fantasy of who they could be. You are grounded in the truth of who they actually were. This is not about anger. You are not seeking revenge. You are not waiting for an apology or a grand gesture, because closure did not come from them. It came from within. You outgrew the dysfunction. You outgrew the waiting. You outgrew the hope that they would finally meet you where you've always stood. And now they are panicking because the energy you used to pour into them is gone. The comfort of your presence has been replaced with silence, and not the kind of silence that waits. It is the kind of silence that decides, the kind that announces without saying a word, this chapter has ended, and I am not reopening the book. They are still waiting on a return. But you are already living in your rebirth, and this time there's no coming back, because this isn't a break, it's a boundary, it's a burial. It's done. Number 14. Your departure wasn't just personal, it was prophetic. Your departure shook more than just a few emotions. It rearranged the entire spiritual atmosphere. They thought you were simply walking away from them. What they didn't realize was you were being removed. Not out of pride, not out of bitterness, but because heaven issued a relocation order that could no longer be delayed. Staying would have meant forfeiting your assignment. Remaining would have meant participating in your own spiritual decay, and God was never going to let that happen. This wasn't about setting boundaries. It was a divine extraction, a rescue mission. Because the space you left wasn't just toxic, it was spiritually contaminated. There was manipulation dressed as love, control masked as concern, guilt disguised as loyalty. You weren't just surrounded by dysfunction, you were slowly being poisoned by it. The people, the energy, the atmosphere, All of it had stopped growing long ago, and anything that doesn't grow starts to rot. Spiritually, emotionally, mentally, you began to feel that decay in your bones, and God knew you couldn't thrive in soil that was secretly killing your roots. So your exit wasn't rebellion, it was revelation. You were shown the truth and you obeyed. You didn't need applause, you didn't need a farewell party, you needed freedom. And obedience cost you comfort, but it gave you clarity, it gave you restoration, and most of all, it gave you realignment. You stopped trying to fix what was spiritually expired and finally made room for what was eternally assigned. Now, people are watching from afar and wondering how you're glowing, how doors are opening, how peace is following you like a shadow. They don't understand that heaven always endorses obedience. When you left, you weren't just making a decision, you were making a declaration. You said yes to what God had next. And every move you've made since then has been backed by divine provision. You didn't abandon anything. You didn't give up. You completed your assignment and left the battlefield with your soul intact. That's not quitting, that's graduation. And while they're still trying to rewrite the narrative of your exit, God is rewriting your future, one obedient step at a time. Your exit wasn't loud, but it was legendary. It didn't come with drama, but it came with destiny. And while they're still confused, replaying the past, trying to figure out how you had the courage to walk away, heaven already confirmed that you didn't walk away. You walked into alignment. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. You didn't leave because you were weak. You left because you finally remembered your worth, your calling, and your divine assignment. Let them talk. Let them assume. Let them romanticize the old version of you they could control. That version no longer exists. What exists now is someone who has been refined by fire, trained in isolation, and elevated through obedience. You didn't leave to make a point. You left to make peace with yourself, with your Creator, and with the life that was always meant for you. This chapter wasn't closed in bitterness, it was sealed in divine wisdom. And everything they tried to delay is now being accelerated, not because of revenge, but because of release. You no longer live for their apology, you live for your purpose. And that's what makes your goodbye so powerful. It wasn't just personal, it was prophetic, it was holy, it was necessary. So walk boldly. You didn't just survive, you realigned. And now that you've honored your yes, the rest of your life will be marked by favor, clarity, and peace that doesn't need to be explained. They can't believe you left, but heaven rejoices that you did. If this message hit home, if it confirmed what your spirit already knew deep down, then don't just scroll away. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a word that aligns with your journey. Like this video if you felt seen, comment below, and let me know what part spoke straight to your soul. And share this with someone who needs to know it's okay to walk away and still be divinely aligned. You're not alone. And this space was created for voices like yours, stories like yours, and strength like yours. Stay connected, stay growing, and remember your healing is not up for debate. It's a divine move. God bless you. God bless.